I'm doing well, thanks. Noor, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Ahmed, for joining this webinar session. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Where to Win webinar series. My name is Noor Basha, Senior Marketing Manager at Winwire Technologies, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we start, let me highlight few housekeeping items. As you can see, most of them are available on the screen, but let me highlight few of them. So during the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. And recording of this session will be shared to you in next 24 to 48 hours. So today's topic for the session is going offline with Salesforce 1 Mobile SDK, where my colleague Ahmed Hassan will discuss more in terms of the different options available on the Salesforce, how you can access Salesforce offline. So let me take a minute to introduce you to Ahmed, who is my colleague. Ahmed Hassan is a director for digital customer experience practice at Winwire Technologies, and he brings over 17 years of experience in delivering strategic CRM solutions to help transform the enterprises. He has extensive knowledge of Salesforce Sales and Service Cloud as well as Force.com. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Ahmed. Ahmed, over to you.
Thanks, Noor. So welcome everyone. As Noor introduced myself, I've been, in the CRM consulting industry for a better part of 17 years. I've worked on a variety of products. I've been more involved with Salesforce for the last several as, this product and suite of products has really taken off. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about what the offline mobile capabilities are. So we've got, I think, about 30 minutes in total for this, and I would like to get to, at the end, have a couple of minutes left for questions, so let's get started. So the overall agenda, we're going to just briefly touch upon why there's this need of going offline, why is it important, and then from there we'll take a broad overview and understand what are the options at the highest level. And from there, really the main need of this webinar is the Mobile SDK and how you can use that and leverage that to go offline, and understanding a little bit of what's under the hood there. Mobile SDK, however, isn't the only possible solution if you want to go offline. There are others, and it really depends on what your use case is. So I'll touch upon Salesforce 1, an HTML5-based solution, and hybrid solutions as well. And then finally, we'll wrap up by just talking about some different use cases and what might be the related solutions in using any of the options that we have gone through. So that's kind of the roadmap of what we'll be navigating through today. So the need for being mobile while being offline, I think all of us have experienced that at one point or another. You're on your mobile device and you don't have signal, or you may not have Wi-Fi. And this becomes, while that's common from a consumer perspective, but when we're talking in the context of employees that companies are expecting to be productive, it becomes very relevant. And the question is, how can the users continue to be productive even if their device is not online? And so that's why there's a need for having the capability to continue working in the mobile apps on the device even when you're not offline. Okay, so what are the options within Salesforce Mobile for doing that? The first one is the Mobile SDK, and this is really, native to iOS or Android. The next one is Salesforce 1, their pre-built app that you can download from Google Play or the App Store on iTunes in the Apple world. That's also available. And then another option yet is HTML5, and yes, that's right, HTML5, which we, for those of you who know about HTML5, typically think of that as more of an online experience, which it primarily is, but even there's some capabilities. And then finally, hybrid. And hybrid I'll get into, but it's basically a combination of native and HTML5. And so it's important to understand between these various options. You can see here in this table I've tried to highlight, the main thing when it comes to CRUD capabilities, create, read, update, and delete. Salesforce One is really limited to just read only, and that too on what you may have been viewing when you were online, and it caches that locally. It doesn't require a mobile SDK, whereas the hybrid and the mobile SDK or the native-based solutions obviously do require that. Conversely, if you're going with an HTML5 based solution, you are going to need to have some additional tools and frameworks, and I'll describe what those are briefly when we get there. And then finally, understanding Visualforce and Apex and whether or not those were required as a part of your solution. That final column just shows you there that that's really relevant in the last two cases with HTML5 and hybrid. Okay, so broadly, that's what your options are when it comes to going offline in a mobile environment with Salesforce. Let's talk about the SDK a little bit. So what are its capabilities? As we already said, you can view, create, edit data offline. The big thing here is that you get access through Salesforce APIs in the mobile SDK, and many of the native platform capabilities become available to you through the mobile SDK. The other big plus point of the mobile SDK is that it is managing the data on the device and making sure that it's encrypted and secure, which, as we all know, is a prerequisite in any kind of enterprise environment. Okay, so what exactly is the mobile SDK? So for many of you who are familiar with Salesforce or have been investigating and may have attended, this is Salesforce, their own perspective of the SDK. This is how they break it down. At the highest level, you have native and hybrid frameworks, and then from there, you've got some key components: the Smart Sync, the SmartStore, and the Enterprise. And these are all about where data is going to be stored, how it's getting transmitted, and what are the access and security measures that are in place. And then across the bottom there, you have a variety of shared services that include push notification, the container, which is really more relevant for the hybrid scenario, the REST APIs, file services, and then mobile device management policies. So of all of these, when it comes to going offline, there's a couple that I would like to focus on in our conversation today, and that's the ones that you see there: the Smart Sync, the SmartStore, identity and security, the REST API, and there's one more that's actually not in the SDK, but it's in Salesforce, and that's called the Connected App, and so we'll cover that as well. So let's talk a little bit about how this whole architecture works and how are these components working. So up in the Salesforce App Cloud, you can have any app running there, whether it's Sales Cloud or it might be another Salesforce app that you are using, Service Cloud, or it could be a custom app that you developed on Force.com. So with that in place, what you have to do is you have to set up something called a connected app, and we'll get into a little bit about what that is. But that's basically the gateway that is between your mobile devices and your Salesforce org and the app on your org that you want to give access to, because you may have multiple apps in the same org. So from there, the device gets connected. The user is entering information, whether they're online or whether they're offline, into their mobile device, into a custom app that's been built using the mobile SDK, and that information is getting put into the SmartStore database, which is then leveraged by SmartSync and REST APIs to push data back up into Salesforce. And then over there on the right, you can see, in order for any of this to work, obviously you have to be logged in, and so broadly speaking, that's how the information flows, and these are the key components that are required. So let's go into more detail and now drill into each one of these. So what exactly does the connected app provide you? So it enables you to basically restrict which users you want to provide. You can also limit them by their IP addresses. Another really interesting feature is the connected app can also be used to provision for third-party services. So if you want to set up, or provision user accounts in Google or Box or some other third-party service out there, you can use the connected app to accomplish that. And then finally, another thing that's really important to understand about the connected app is that what this also does is it provides yet another filter in terms of what within your application you may be able to access through the mobile device. So, for instance, your mobile application may have 50 or 60 different objects, but you only want to expose a subset of those, and the connected app will allow you to do that. Okay, let's talk about identity and security. So, even though the use case that we're interested here in is being able to work while offline, it still requires being online to log in. And so that's an important thing to understand when you're trying to think through the use case that your company may have, is understanding that it's going to assume that, with any custom app that you're going to start, the user's going to start being online and they're going to get logged in. The Mobile SDK uses SAML and OAuth to authenticate. It provides single sign-on capabilities, and it issues tokens that go to the mobile device, which are then used by APIs. So it begins with the username, with the user entering the username and password, getting authenticated, and then they're in the app and they can work, and the app will then continue to synchronize as long as the token that they have isn't expired. And if it does expire, a new one can be requested and issued automatically. And if you're offline, it will let you continue to work, and then when it comes back online, it will try to get a new token before it does the sync. And so, it is possible to control how long the tokens last. They can last from a minimum of 15 minutes long to up to, I think, 12 hours. But there is that flexibility there. And then finally, the Mobile SDK also provides the ability to provide PIN authentication in your app. So this is yet another level of security. If you want, for instance, without the mobile device itself being locked, you can still lock your app after a certain time and require the user to enter a PIN in before they can get back in. So that's a little bit about what the identity and security capabilities are. Coming to the SmartStore. So SmartStore is basically an encrypted database that sits on your device, either in iOS or on the Android platform. And once you come back online, all of the data that you've been creating will get synchronized back into Salesforce. It uses the concept of what's called a soup, which are JSON documents in a simple single database. And what's important to know about the SmartStore is that in the context of hybrid, which we will come to a little bit later, you have to explicitly add this component in order to be able to use it. SmartStore is fundamentally available both in the native and the hybrid development scenarios. It's not available through HTML5. An important thing to understand about SmartStore is that the data is very volatile. It's tied to the tokens and the authenticated user. So if the user does not re-authenticate for whatever reason and their changes haven't been saved, they will lose that. So that's also something important to understand when you're considering deploying a mobile solution in your company using Salesforce. The data types in SmartStore are the basic ones, including you can have an integer, you can have floating point values, and you can have text strings. And the SmartStore also provides you what is called the SmartStore Inspector. It's kind of a test and debugging tool that allows you to make sure that as you're developing your app, you can examine the soup metadata, you can examine the soup data, you can clear soup's contents, that is the database contents that are on the device, and you can perform smart queries, and all of this is for the purpose of making sure that your app is working as you intended it to. It's important to know that inspector capability, although it's there, it has to be removed before you finally deploy your app. So that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're going through that. Coming to SmartSync. So the SmartSync is a framework that provides a mechanism for easily getting data from Salesforce, modeling it as JavaScript objects, and caching it for offline use. It's built on the popular Backbone.js open source library, and it's using SmartStore as the place where it's going to cache all that information. During upload, you can get, or download for that matter, you can actually get very granular over the synchronization process, so you can control the sequence and what's going to get synchronized. And it also has some capabilities around resolving conflicts with data on the server. So going into SmartSync a little bit, just to understand what its components are, it provides a sync manager that uses the APIs for the connection back to Salesforce. It uses a metadata manager, and that's really to help bring down information from Salesforce that's going to drive your app, like pick lists and so forth. It uses a cache manager to write back and forth to read and write to the SmartStore database. And then it's got a couple of builders for SOQL and SOSL to enable querying and searching while you are offline. So that's kind of the capabilities of SmartSync. Coming to the RESTful APIs. So if your company has Salesforce and you have integrated Salesforce, you may have used the REST APIs already, so you may be familiar with this. But it's really a heart of and a key part of the Mobile SDK. These are stateless, designed for mobile and Web 2.0 APIs. They use standard HTTP methods, and it uses OAuth 2.0 to connect to Salesforce. It supports API. The REST API supports both JSON and XML messaging, and it's important to know that with your Salesforce licenses, there's always a limited number of API calls that you can make on a daily basis, and the calls that are made through the Mobile SDK using the REST API do hit up against that limit. So you want to think about that as you're putting together your design. Just a final note on this, the nature of REST APIs is that they're supposed to be lightweight. It's not designed for transacting large numbers of records simultaneously. So that's a little bit about the REST APIs. So let's talk about just some best practices. When you're developing using Mobile SDK, when you're in an offline mode, obviously you're not going to have Salesforce IDs. Yet you may want to be referencing those in your app as you're trying to relate different pieces of information together. So in that case, you can use SmartStore IDs, which are auto-generated and available to you to put together those relationships. SmartStore also provides some metadata in the mobile environment that helps you keep track of what's been synced versus what's not. And it's created time as well as created by. There's two versions of each one of these things: last updated by, last updated time, and last synced. And so that's something that you can use in your application to drive the logic of how it works. So the sync down and sync up, as I think I already mentioned, are all through the SmartStore. So you want to keep that in mind. It's not that the architecture is when you're online, the connection is going through directly to Salesforce versus when you're offline, it switches to the SmartStore. No, it all goes through the SmartStore, and that's to ensure a better user experience. The sequence of objects syncing up or down can be controlled by the app, and it becomes relevant, especially if you're creating related data, because you're going to want to think through what order you create that in. As I mentioned earlier, meta objects are also available, and this is important because you want to reduce the development cycle, and you do not want to build something in Salesforce and then rebuild it on your mobile device, and then every time you need to change it in Salesforce, you need to change it. No, you can use the same metadata that you're developing on Salesforce itself and bring it down to your app and let that drive. So if you change a pick list value today, that's going to appear the next time the users synchronize with Salesforce. Finally, it's important to understand that it's an extension of Salesforce, and as such, when your user logs in, their profile as well as the connected app settings that I mentioned earlier are put into effect, and they're really controlling the user experience in terms of the access to the objects that you're exposing in your mobile device app. Okay, so that's the Mobile SDK. A couple of other options that we have in terms of going offline are Salesforce One, HTML5, and Hybrid. I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on each one of these because I think it's important in the context of going offline to understand what options there are, and that you have choices, and think really about your use case and determining which option you want to go with. So Salesforce One, it's their pre-built app. It's available on iOS and Android. As I mentioned earlier, it's really only viewing data that you can do through Salesforce One, and that too what's been recently viewed. Any other create or edit capabilities are just not there. Salesforce One is really designed to be an employee-focused application. It's designed to extend the Salesforce experience. The nice thing about it is that you have to do really minimal level of effort to develop for it. It's using the standard Salesforce components, or like page layouts. You just configure a different another page layout to make that accessible on your mobile device. You don't have to have mobile expertise in doing that. It's leveraging the standard Lightning components that now are a part of Salesforce, even in the UI, and it's available for all the Salesforce editions. So if you're just looking to make things available for viewing offline, this is not a bad solution. It's quick, it's easy, and you can get it into the hands of users with a high level of quality in a very short time frame. HTML5, as you may or may not know, it's the latest HTML markup language. It's browser-based. So it's really designed by its very nature, obviously, to be an online solution. That being said, and as such, it's going to require you to host your pages in Visualforce and deliver HTML content through Visualforce. If you want to extend that capability in going offline, you're going to need to add additional components. Specifically, you're going to have to use a database, and you're going to have to get a database that works offline. And such databases are available. You have to be careful, though, about which ones you decide to use, because the more popular one is the one that's obviously doesn't have any cost associated with it, but it's not encrypted. So there is an encrypted version of that out there, but then you have to pay for that. It's not a significant amount, and it's not pay per user. It's pay per the particular app that you're developing and deploying. So something to consider when if you're really interested in HTML5. The other thing is that HTML5, it can emulate the look and feel of an app built on the native device, but it's not probably going to perform as well as the native development will. And this can impact user experience. So if that's really top on your priority in terms of what you want to deliver, this one may not be for you. Some of the benefits on the other side are that it provides the broadest reach across different devices. You do have to handle the different devices, but it's at the coding level itself. It's not in the architecture of delivering that app. Delivering an HTML5 app is probably, it's in one place. It's in Salesforce, and it's really simple from that perspective. But the limitations are there in terms of the offline capabilities. Okay. Finally, coming to hybrid. So hybrid is really kind of a blend of the native and the HTML5. The idea is that in a hybrid app, you will have some development on a native platform, both for iOS and Android, but it's really minimal. It's called a container. And Salesforce hybrid containers use Apache Cordova 3.6, and they use the Mobile SDK as a Cordova plugin. But once you have those components in place, the rest of it really is based on HTML5 that you're going to host in Salesforce. Now, there's two different types of hybrid apps. There's one that's local and one that's remote. The local one is basically using REST APIs to connect between Salesforce and the server. The remote one is actually downloading all the pages into the container and making them available offline. So those are the things that you're going to want to consider when you're looking at using a hybrid solution. So the benefit of it is it combines the ease of HTML5 web app development, but it still gives you some of the capabilities that are there on the native platform. Okay, so we've been through all the options now from the Mobile SDK, Salesforce One, HTML5, and hybrid. So let's look at some use cases and explore those. So in the first use case there, if the sales rep just needs to be able to view opportunities and contacts, and the target user base we're talking about has iPhones and Android devices, really you can use Salesforce One just to fulfill that need, and it'll do you just fine. In the second scenario, we take it up a notch, and we say we need to be able to create contacts while offline. And we also want to give them a compelling user experience. So even though, So in that case, then you're going to want to use the Mobile SDK, and you're going to want to develop separate native apps on both iOS and Android using the Mobile SDK. In the third scenario, you're going to want to you want to look at if your mobile app is going to track deliveries for sales, service, and operations. Some users may even have the Windows smartphones and need to access while offline temporarily. But while most other users have iOS or Android, that could potentially be a scenario for using an HTML5-based app, which is going to be really browser-based, using some additional components like the offline encrypted database that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, if you're looking to empower an entire organization to collaborate and swarm every case from anywhere, and most users are on iPhone, but some are on Android, and you don't have extensive capabilities within your organization to support Android, you might want to consider the hybrid option. Because while you will have to do some native Android development using the Mobile SDK, it's really going to be pretty minimal. Salesforce provides you the containers, as I mentioned earlier, and those are something that you can use without having to have a deep expertise in mobile development. And so that's kind of a quick overview in the 30 minutes about mobility on Salesforce and going offline. A little bit about us. We're Winwire. We're an IT solution integration services company. Our main mission is to make information actionable for enterprises in the mobile cloud. We do analytics solutions. We build collaborative-based solutions and also custom app development, and across a variety of different technology sets, including Salesforce, that you see here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm running the digital customer experience practice and looking after all of our Salesforce implementations and capabilities. So we've got about 3 minutes left, Noor. I think what I'd like to see is in the last few minutes, if we have some questions, maybe we can try to take those.
Sure. Thanks, Ahmed. Thanks for the wonderful session and sharing some of the options available to go offline with the Salesforce, as well as the use cases. I have a few questions coming in from the audiences. Let me take first one coming from Scott, where he asks, is it possible to go offline when connecting to communities or marketing?
Yeah, so you can absolutely use the Mobile SDK to connect to communities and community users, and community user logins can be used. There's a couple of things that you'll need to do if you want to do that. First of all, that option definitely is going to be through using the Mobile SDK. You're going to want to make sure that each community member has an API-enabled permission, and you can set this through their profile and permission sets. You're going to want to make sure that your community is configured with those API-enabled profiles and permission sets. And then finally, you're going to want to make sure you configure your Mobile SDK to use your community's login endpoint. And if you do all of those things, you absolutely can go offline with it. I think you have to think through what your use case is going to be, but it's absolutely possible. As far as marketing is concerned, which is another app, Marketing Cloud actually has its own Mobile SDK, which is really driven around push notifications. I learned more about that when I was there at Dreamforce last week. It's really, I think, the use case for it is really intended to be for users that are online. However, you can use that Mobile SDK, which controls a variety of different notification mechanisms, side by side with the Mobile SDK that I've covered here, to create an offline experience. But you'd have to think through carefully what that was going to be. So that's a quick answer on that one.
Sure. Thanks.
Anything else, Noah?
Yep. So John asked, what are the iOS requirements for deploying the Mobile SDK?
Okay. Great question. So on iOS, you're going to want to, if you haven't already been developing with it, which I would assume with the question that's there is the case, you're going to want to use the latest SDK, which is 3.3 right now. You're going to want to, it's for iOS 7 or later. In terms of the development tool, you're going to want to use Xcode, and you're going to need to use version 6 or later for Xcode. And you're going to need a developer edition with a connected app in order to put together your overall solution. A quick note on Xcode, as some of you may or may not have heard, you're going to want to make sure you get that directly from Apple. There's been some news in the press in the last few days about some hackers who had put out a sort of modified version of Xcode that was not fully authorized, and any developer that used that, their app got infected, and it was actually able to get past Apple's usually very stringent screening process. So make sure that if you're going to be going down that path for iOS, and you're going to get Xcode, which is the tool that you use to develop for iOS, that you get it directly from Apple.
Sure. Thanks, Ahmad. I am like we are almost there. I'll take a last question for the day. Can you elaborate more about SmartSync's conflict resolution capabilities?
Yeah, so a few things to understand about the data conflict capabilities. One, the main design that SmartSync has in place, the whole thrust of it is to prevent unwanted data from being lost. So the way that it accomplishes this is it actually uses a secondary cache and to contain the original values that it'll download from a server. And so when it is then synchronizing back, it'll compare that value with the server's current value, and then finally with what the local value is that the user would have input. And it'll compare these values, and then you can, in your SmartSync, in your mobile SDK, use on the save of records, you can use a variable for conflict detection. It's a sort of a mode, if you will, to either overwrite what's on the server or to not overwrite what's on the server and to accept what's yours. And it does this through a complex comparison through these three values that I just mentioned.
Sure. Thanks, Ahmad. Thanks a lot. Can you just move to the last slide? Maybe I just wanted to share some of the contact details with the audiences. So
Sure.
In case if you guys have more questions, what I would request you is to write to us at marketing@winwire.com, and we'll have answer those questions from Ahmad as soon as possible. So just before we wind up, we have our next webinar scheduled on October 21st, which is on Cortana Analytics, which is a fully managed big data and advanced analytics suite that enables you to transform your data into intelligent actions, where we will be covering more about this particular topic. So thanks everyone for joining this session. I hope you enjoyed, and look forward in case if you have any questions or clarifications. Thanks, Ahmad. Thanks for taking up this session.
Thanks, Noor, and thanks everyone for attending, and look forward to any feedback that you may have and making it better for next time. Thank you.
Thank you.